Well, we continue with reaction to the news of Donald Trump claiming his seat as the 45th President of the United States. And we're joined now via Skype by Jean-Pierre Kloppers, CEO of Brands Eye. Mr. Kloppers, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So we have just witnessed one of the most surprising election results in recent history. And before we get into this, let's just give the viewers some context to Brands Eye, because one of the things we want to look at is how wrong the pollsters got this. And I mean, Brands Eye was one of the few pollsters who predicted Brexit in the UK, for example, simply by tracking the vast numbers of what people had to say. So this result is one of those situations that are inexplicable beforehand, but after the fact, that's when we can say this is what happened. So how did the pollsters get this so wrong?
I think what the polls missed in Brexit and in the US elections is just the emotion that people were expressing on the ground. Because a poll, and it's typical of most traditional research, where you have the challenge of question bias. You ask somebody how they feel, and depending on the nature of the question, you might get an honest or not an honest answer. And where Donald Trump is saying the kinds of things that he is saying, to say that you support him, you're just opening yourself up to ridicule, but it might mask how people really feel. And what social media has given us, and I think Brexit and now the US elections, it's the coming of age of social media, where it gives you this kind of feeling of what is the raw emotion on the ground, and how does that vary from state to state, and how does it change over time? And that's what like a small tech company from South Africa was able to measure in ways that the top polling companies in the world couldn't.
All right, so let's look at the battleground states. They were always one of the main talking points. How did social media call these?
So at the moment, I think we're still waiting for 2 of the 11 states to come in. At the moment, we've got 7 out of the 9 spot on. And we saw the trend change a couple of weeks back. I think when Hillary Clinton was way ahead in the polls and they were giving her an 80% chance of winning, we started seeing sentiment shift. And this was kind of before the email saga happened. We saw in all of those 11 states, Donald Trump getting significant amounts of advocacy on the ground in those states. And even when we kind of filtered out the noise, we filtered out the people who were just kind of mass tweeting and just distilled it down to a group of individuals, we tried to understand how are these people backing him, and there were a lot of people backing him. When the email saga happened, it just kind of put that feeling on steroids, where suddenly they felt like they now had license to speak, and it gave them a voice when before they were maybe holding back a little bit. And that's when we thought, wow, there might be an upset coming in this election based on what we're seeing, because it's a very similar trend across all of the battleground states to what we saw in Brexit.
So the view of Trump that we saw in the media versus the results of the polls so completely different. Yeah,
correct. And I think what we often see from South Africa, or even from anywhere outside of the US, you see what the media shares, and most of that is sensible news. Whereas this was not an election about sensible news, it was an election about emotion, not fact. And that emotion Donald Trump appealed to, this kind of outsider who was coming in and saying, I'm not the establishment, I'm not going to give you another 4 or 8 years of politicians just kind of being politicians, I'm going to be totally different. And for a large portion of Americans, that struck a chord where they're feeling like they are losing touch with the American dream and who they are as a nation. And Donald Trump, rightly or wrongly, symbolized to them that kind of emotional connection rather than just a pure head connection, making a rational choice.
Absolutely. It's clear that they are dissatisfied with the government. I want to look now at, you mentioned traditional research. What value has social media provided in these elections over the traditional polls?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, it gives us the raw emotion, and it almost exaggerates what happens in polls a few weeks later. And we've seen that with the polls, the Nate Silvers and the 538s of the world, which we've been watching very closely. And typically when a result comes out in a poll, we see it a few weeks before that starting to emerge in the social media data. The challenge with the social media data in getting to that kind of insight is it's 3 million people. You know, this is not a poll. And I think the fundamental difference is it's people just expressing their opinions and frustrations of their own volition. And we infer a poll out of that by extracting that data in a way that we can then analyze it. But it's hard. 3 million people, 30 million conversations no poll is that size. And I think that's where social media gives an edge, because it's measuring everyone. And so when you take a statistically significant sample, you're not selecting it and then having kind of a question which you introduce at that point. You're taking a sample of everyone that's speaking. And as we saw with Brexit and now again, it appears that social media is becoming more and more representative of how everybody feels. And that for us has been exciting. Obviously, it's a shock to the world.
All right, Jean-Pierre Kloppers, CEO of Brands Eye, there live on Skype. Mr. Kloppers, thank you very much for